2024 HR benchmark report is in. I invite you to go to assuresoftware.com, go to resources, and download the HR benchmark report. Follow along as we unpack the data. Here's what we did. We surveyed more than 1,000 businesses and asked them questions, 5 questions in each of 8 categories from pre-employment through post-employment. Here's the categories: recruiting and hiring, benefits, onboarding, development, compliance, retention, performance, and post-employment. So binary questions. Do you do this best practice? Do you do that best practice? So 5 questions for each of 8 categories. That's 40 questions in total. Asked one question at the end: what best describes you last year? Were you a fast growth firm, a growth firm, or was it a zero growth year for you? Was it flat, or did you actually decline in revenue? And then we correlate the answers to revenue growth and HR best practices. Thanks for joining us today. Welcome to Mission to Grow, the small business guide to cash, compliance, and the war for talent. I'm your host, Mike Vannoy. Each week, we'll bring you experts in accounting, finance, human resources, benefits, employment law, and more. You'll learn ways to access capital through creative financing and tax strategies, tactical information you need to stay compliant with ever-changing employment laws, and people strategies you need to win the war for talent. Mission to Grow is sponsored by Assure. Assure helps more than 100,000 businesses get access to capital, stay compliant, and develop the talent they need to grow. Enjoy the show. So we're just going to jump into question number 1. And if you're following along, so you know the report up on the website to get it and follow along. Go to the back in the appendix, and we're going to walk through the first 5 questions. They are: do you have written job descriptions for each opening? Do you conduct background checks on candidates before they start work? Are you certain your job postings are compliant with federal, state, and local laws? Are you certain your interview process is compliant and effective? And are you certain your applications do not ask any illegal questions? So the first one, I'll say this one had probably a tighter spread across all 40 questions. The entire survey tied for the tightest spread on this section for recruiting and hiring. Do you have written job descriptions for each opening? The zero growth firms, Mary, 76% of respondents said yes to that question. Growth firms, this is interesting. Growth firms, 83% yes. This is one of 3 instances in the entire survey. 80%, less than the fast growth, 80% of fast growth companies said yes, that they have written job descriptions for each opening. To me, the bigger punchline is the spread between the zero growth firms and the fast growth firms. It's only 4%. Does that surprise you that there's only a 4% spread between the fastest growing firms in the United States versus companies who are struggling?
Yeah, it does surprise me, actually. And I guess the reason is, we do Fair Labor Standard Act audits all the time, and you can't do it without a job description. So we work with all types of companies, fast growth, and not so fast growth, but very few employers have up-to-date compliant job descriptions. So maybe that's the difference in my mind. I always think you can have it, but is it compliant? And is it going to be effective in all the different ways that you would use a job description? So it does surprise me a little bit. I would have thought that the slow growth companies wouldn't be focused on a document like that, although it's very important. So I was a little surprised about it. Yeah.
One of the things, and you and I have talked about this before, as we've kind of unpacked this data and presented to a few audiences now. It's a quantitative study, not a qualitative, right? So my gut would say that the qualitative side, your fast growth firms are probably writing better job
Yeah.
descriptions, because this is binary. Either they said yes, they do it, or no, they don't. But the fact that over 1,000 respondents, it's a big sample size, and to be that tight, my suspicion is this is a check the box activity, which would align with what your
Yeah.
personal experience is, right? Where you come in and see, okay, yeah, you had a job description, it wasn't compliant, maybe go down that a little bit further. When you first engage with a client, somebody in your team, um, what are the areas of non-compliance you see? But maybe also then not just the compliance side. I'm curious for what your team typically sees on the qualitative side. Are we cookie cutter copy paste from Google, or are we actually writing a thoughtful job description to slot a really
Yeah,
talented
I
person in that role?
think, we work with, again, organizations of all sizes. Some have HR, SHRM certified, um, HR managers that we work alongside with to assist, and some have nothing. So it is across the board, but I do find both. I find that some of these documents, and let's just focus on the job description because that's what we're discussing. Some have the job description and it's not not compliant. So when we're doing that FLSA audit for this particular client this week, we have to do 15 job descriptions for them because they had two out of the 15 unique positions they have at their organization. And to effectively do a Fair Labor Standards Act audit, meaning who is exempt and who is not exempt, that job description, of course, defends those exemptions, and they were not defending the exemptions they had on the job description. So they didn't have enough, and the ones that they had were not compliant. So I see it across the board. It is rare that we go into an organization, and of course, they're utilizing us because they recognize the gap in the HR services that they have, the HR function, and they're bringing in the cavalry.
All right, let's jump into the questions. I'm going to rattle them off. Kind of maybe you give your reaction to these being what we would call, in fact, 5 good best practice questions for this category, and then we'll jump into the answers. So, question number 1 was: Do you offer paid time off? It seems like a simple thing, but it's a benefit, right? Do you offer health insurance? Do you offer a wellness program? Do you offer a 401k or some type of a savings plan? And are you certain you're compliant with the Affordable Care Act requirements? So certainly we could have asked many more things around benefits, but you want to
Sure.
just comment on how you certainly participated with the team who put these questions together. What do you have to say about those being kind of the high level best practices when it comes to benefits, period?
Yeah, so I think that employers have to think about number one, uh, cost, right? So your employees are looking at their total comp. They're not just looking at their salary, which is a good thing. You have an educated employee base, right? So total comp will include their benefits, but you also have a workforce that values time off, right? So you and I were talking, you take 1 week vacation a year. My son, our kids are taking 4 weeks. That's a big difference. So that there is a monetary component there for the employer, of course, but it's a different monetary component for the employee. The employee is looking at that like a lifestyle, like a cultural thing. So I'm glad that we included PTO.
Yeah.
And we included the benefits, the healthcare benefits in this equation because it's a big deal. And the employer has to say, okay, who am I trying to attract? And what's the most attractive to those individuals? So do I give more PTO, but don't pay as much towards the benefits? What do I offer? What's the special sauce to get the best people?
Yeah. So let's jump more on that first question. Do you offer paid time off? So of all 5 questions that I rattled off, the average spread between fast growth companies and zero growth companies, the average between all 5 is a 20% spread. It's big. So the difference, so clearly as a group, in aggregate, fast growth companies clearly see the benefit of benefits compared to zero growth firms. So it's a big difference. This is by far the smallest category. It's only a 5% spread. So do you offer paid time off, sick time, maternity leave, etc.? Zero growth firms, 78%, still by far the majority, versus 83% fast growth. So Fast growth companies even do it more, do it better, but it's only a 5-point spread. This is we've said it before, this is a quantitative survey, not a qualitative. So we don't know how much time they give off.
Right.
It seems to me like, okay, in a tight labor market, good luck hiring anybody if you don't offer any PTO. What's your sense when you engage with clients of what the zero growth firms versus fast growth firms, what is qualitatively different about their PTO policies?
Yeah. So, and there's always going to be a compliance issue here as well, right? So, I'll give you an example. I have an employer who's a manufacturer, and when doing his handbook, I said, okay, what do you do for PTO? And he says, I don't give any. And I go, excuse me? He said, I don't give any. I said, how do you hire people? And he goes, I get a lot of employee referrals. If they need to take time off, they take it without pay. Well, you're in New York, so you have sick time, New York sick time. So you minimally have to give that. And I will tell you, even though he resisted, he now sees the benefit of it. And he says, now, because I tell them they get 5 days for sick pay, that's, based on the amount of employees that he has. He said it's more controlled. People are happier, but believe it or not, they're taking less time off. So, it's very important to be compliant, but you also have to give your employees or your candidates a good reason to work for you. Yeah. Everybody needs time off to reset, recharge, take care of family, right? So I can't imagine not giving any time off, but there are, nobody mandates vacation. It's only sick time that some states mandate.
Here's the 5 questions that we're going to unpack today. Do you have an onboarding checklist for new employees? Do you have an employee handbook that's been updated in the last 12 months? Spoiler alert, that's the biggie. Do you have a new hire packet or e-paperwork? Do new hires go through formal orientation to learn the company's mission, vision, and values? And are hiring managers and staff trained how to complete I-9s compliantly? So if we just average the answers, Mary, I'd say this one I'd say impactful and kind of middle of the road. We had some categories that didn't show as strong a correlation. In all cases, there was a correlation. Better HR always, in every single instance, equated to faster revenue growth. I'd say this is a middle of the pack category, onboarding, but there's a couple here that were really big near the top for the entire survey. So this entire category of onboarding, there's a 13 percentage point difference between zero growth firms and your fastest growth firms. When you slice this to look at companies under 25 employees, it jumps to 21%. So small business owners and entrepreneurs, founders, especially, such a simple thing like onboarding might sound boring, might sound like a checklist, might sound administrative. 21 percentage point difference, 65% versus 85%. Difference in zero growth firms versus fast growth firms. I got a math problem here. 65 to 85 is 20. It says 21. I bet there's a rounding issue in my formula. There's a big spread for the fast growth firms. Mary, before we jump into individual questions, you see clients, your team talks to clients every single day. What do you see in the onboarding practices for firms of all sizes?
I mean, listen, I'm going to say again, and I've said it in the past, that I'm not sure when we say onboarding and a client answers, yes, I'm doing it, that we're talking about the same exact thing. I would also say that it's very, very important. And a lot of times I'll talk to clients and go, yeah, I onboard them. I have them fill out a I-9 and a W-4 and I go to work. Like, yeah, we bring them in, kind of thing. So I think it runs the gamut, and I think it's as I always say, there's a compliance side and a culture side, and if you're not hitting both of those C's, then you're missing the boat, and it's not being done correctly.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it on prior episodes in this series. This is a quantitative study, not a qualitative, right? So we're asking, do you do it or don't you do it? Yes or no. It doesn't mean that they're doing it well. So do you have an employee handbook that's been updated in the last 12 months? You might say yes. It could suck. Sorry, but it might not even be
Yeah.
legal. There could be all, but here's,
Right.
I think, maybe the takeaway for folks: the fact that zero growth firms didn't say yes to a 21-point spread compared to the fast growth firms, just by simply trying. You're signaling to your employees
Yeah.
that you care. You're obviously leaning in this area. You're putting the first day, first week experience, making that a priority for people, and that just has other impacts. Whether you're doing it as well as you could or even should, the fact that you're doing it versus not doing it has a big impact.
Absolutely, 100%. And I know we talk a lot about compliance, and I talk to a lot of business owners who are like, "I've never been caught. I'm fine." Right? And we always say hope is not a great strategy, but I understand where you're coming from because I hear it so often. But we're talking about fast growth or growth. And all of this is tied to growth of the organization. You got to start that employee off the right way, setting expectations, making a positive impact to help make that employee productive, which helps make your organization grow. It is tied to growth. So even if you don't, subscribe to the compliance side of things, it doesn't, I'm not trying to scare people. I'm trying to build awareness here. But if that doesn't resonate with our audience, I want the growth piece to resonate because I think everybody wants to
Yeah.
grow.
Development blows all these other categories away, right? So
Yeah.
as we talked, recruiting, benefits, onboarding, and development. If I was to just add up the scores of all 5 questions for each of those categories and compare down year zero growth firms with fast growth firms, the aggregate difference in recruiting, I was surprised how low it was only 10%. Still meaningful. Benefits, a whopping 20%, a couple real outliers in benefits. We talked about that. I encourage everyone to watch that show.
Yeah.
Onboarding, a 13-point spread. Again, a couple outliers were the big difference makers. This one's a whopping 30%. 30%. So
Big difference.
zero growth firms, so they had a down year, they were shrinking, they're flat. They said yes to 50% of the questions. And fast growth firms said yes to 80% of the questions. And when we dial that back and look at just the smaller firms, 25 or fewer employees, the spread goes to 36 percentage points. So this is a massive difference. And
Yeah.
clearly it's an area where fast growth firms get it in a way that, down year and zero growth firms just simply do not. Again, I'm probably going to say this too many times to wear people out. This is a big sample size. This is over 1,065 respondents. The correlation of that many respondents, this is massive. This can't be a coincidence. You can be a movie theater, the best run movie theater in the world, and a pandemic can still put you out of business. You can be a terribly run video conferencing company during a pandemic and have wild success. So there's obviously lots of market factors between products and industries and competitors in demand, but to have a 30+% percentage point spread in just 5 HR best practices around development is just massive. So let's jump into the questions. So the first one, do you use technology resources to offer on-demand training for employees? We didn't, this is binary. So it's yes, we do, or no, we don't. We're not asking the topics of the training. We're not asking whether it's great training or terrible training. It's just, do you provide on-demand technology training or technology through on-demand training? Zero growth firms, 54%, fast growth firms, 75%. So 21-point spread. And when I look at the smaller firms under 25 employees, it grows to 28 points. So it's one of the smaller ones, but it's still 28% spread. It's massive. What do you see when you're talking to clients every week and your team is engaging about this specific, I'd say a bit of a niche question? It's using technology resources for on-demand training.
Well, I was happy you asked this question because I think a lot of organizations will say, I don't have the money. I can't afford to do development and training. And I don't have the time or the expertise in-house. But there's so much technology. We have an amazing offering of, listen, my trainers are stellar. So we do customized, live virtual live training. But boy, the technology out there, it is, cost effective. It is, well, we give it for free, so that's really cost effective, but it's also time effective, right? So for those small firms that are like, they'll say to me, Mary, I only have 5 managers. What am I going to do? Pull them out of business and give them a training all at once? I can't do that. Of course, I've done lots of trainings on Saturdays and Sundays, but the technology piece makes it easy. Number one, that training can be 15-minute increments. Number two, they can do it on their own time. These are managers. They're most likely exempt employees, right? And we don't want people to work, crazy hours, right? We want to have a nice culture within the organization, but there's no reason that you can't say, hey, Mike, you were telling me you have a difficult employee. Here's a training. It's 20 minutes on how to deal with a difficult employee. So Mike can do it on his own time. It just makes sense.
Yeah. Something you said preceding this that I couldn't agree more with is what you signal to your employees by providing it. I think a lot of time, and I'm going to a bunch of thoughts jump through my head. Number one is, I think sometimes as leaders, we've been doing whatever it is this industry is for a while, and it's easy for us to assume, oh, I don't need to train them on that. That's just common sense. That's self-evident. Well, it might feel that way to you now, but maybe you've been in the industry for 10, 20 or more years. To somebody new out of school, they're just entering their career, or maybe they're switching careers into this industry. Stuff that you think is common sense isn't common sense. And there's real value in the training in and of itself. But then just how you're signaling that you're investing in them. It's like, you know what? My boss cares about me. My employer cares about me. And even if I don't even have time to take advantage of the training, what it does for the culture by providing all these resources, all these assets available that I could use if I did have the time.
They care about my success. And I would say here, I'll use Assure as an example. I was interviewing somebody the other day and I'm like, and we give a 12-week training program. She went, wow, Mike, that had a significant effect on her interest in the position. She went from, this seems like a good job. I mean, she actually went, wow, 12-week training, right? So, and I know all organizations can't do that. We're a bigger organization, but with technology, you can. So what we do with our clients is I'll map out 12 months of training for your managers. Let's pick what they're going to do month 1, 2 through 12 in, succession. And each manager, as they're hired or they're promoted, that's what they do. And then we can create a continuum over years that they do. And then, of course, I'm going to interject some customized training to say, this is how we do it here, right? So you said something interesting. A lot of times, my managers have been managers forever. Have they been managers with you forever? Well, that individual needs a little enlightenment. Here's some new ways to do. Let me refresh you. They might be getting burned out, right? The other thing is that the inexperienced people, we so often have that high performer and then we go, Mike, I'm going to promote you. You are a great salesperson. ding, here's my magic wand, you're a manager. It doesn't mean that that person will be able to be a great manager just because they are a great salesperson. It behooves us to train that individual. We have
Yeah.
to train.
All right, so today we're talking about compliance. 5 questions in the SMB HR benchmark report. I'm going to rattle them off. I'm going to talk maybe some high level summary, and then we're going to get into question by question. Do you train managers about HR laws like equal pay, overtime, ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act? Do you keep a Form I-9 for each person you hire for 1 year or more? Do you have a documented process for handling HR investigations and inquiries? Do you conduct sexual harassment training? Are you certain you're compliant with wage and hour requirements to FLSA? It's a significant spread, 15% spread between fast growth companies and zero growth firms. But when I look at the under 25 employee firms, a smaller group, it's big. It's 25 percentage points. So this is yet another area where the fast growth firms either they just get it or they maybe small shrinking firms get it also, but they're not making it a priority. They don't have the resources. Something's going on that is a clear differentiator for the fast growth firms, that they're doing a much better job in the area of HR compliance. You guys all know my guest, the perfect guest for HR compliance, Mary Simmons. Welcome back, Mary.
Thanks, Mike.
All right. I'm curious, before we jump in question by question, what's your take when you saw the results? I'd say in aggregate, fast growth firms versus zero growth firms when it just comes to compliance in general.
So I think that compliance is an area where a lot of business owners are like, yeah, I know I need to be compliant. That's going to cost me too much money or take too much time. I'm going to roll the dice, so I'm fine. So again, I think sometimes the smaller business owner says, A, I don't have the bandwidth. B, I don't have the knowledge, right? And C, well, you're going to cost me a lot of money, Mary, if I'm going to put you in charge of compliance. But I would say, again, that we can't look at these sorts of things like it's just an outlay of money. First of all, it's an insurance in case you were audited. You know everything's in order. Why would you want to look over your shoulder all the time and go, oh, gee, I hope we don't get audited. I hope my things are in order. I hope they don't find what's not in order because I know I haven't done the right thing. But I would always also say, look, I don't want to leave this compliance section with fear. Like, the auditors are coming, Mike, be careful. This can also tie to ROI because when we do things correctly and give the correct benefits and work with employees correctly, and we'll go through it slowly, as you said, our employees, are going to stay. So we're going to retain them. We're going to attract employees because they know this is an organization that does things right. Believe it or not, word of mouth gets out there very quickly. Some of the industries we work with are very small, so the pool of candidates is very small. And you've got sites, that have employees talk about employers, even if it's not a small, geographic, area that you're recruiting in. So business owners need to do the right thing, not just out of fear of being audited, but for the entirety of keeping and attracting talent.
This section. So of the 8 sections, just to remind our audience, recruiting and hiring. So we go from pre-employment to post-employment. Recruiting and hiring, benefits, onboarding, development, compliance, retention, performance, and post-employment. Those are the areas of the survey. So we're smack dab in the middle of the employee life cycle here. We're talking about compliance. Having been in this industry for a really long time, but also an entrepreneur in running businesses during that time, this is one of those things that's like, I think most business owners, small business owners especially, understand that they're not intentionally breaking laws. They probably have a sense that they're not compliant in areas, but they don't know where. But because they've never personally been sued yet or fined yet, been audited yet, This kind of feels like driving 56 miles an hour in a 55 zone. It's like, yeah, it's illegal, but am I, what risk do I really have?
Right.
And so when I think of and we'll talk about a whole bunch of stuff, especially in these specific questions. But when I think about just the correlation, so what does an entrepreneur care about? Well, you care a heck of a lot about revenue. You care a heck of a lot about growing your business. And when you have 1,065 businesses respond to a survey, and if I look at the smaller firms, the less than 25 employees, and there's a 25 percentage point spread between fast growth companies who said yes 82% of the time to these five questions versus zero growth firms who said yes 57% of the time, 25% spread. It's just a massive correlation. So
Yeah.
you might not think about compliance being a revenue driver, and maybe it's not even causal, but it's a minimum a correlation that cannot be ignored because the data set is too big, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you do have to look at it in the negative. There are plenty of businesses who have gone out of business by doing these things wrong and having major lawsuits.
I almost liken this. Sometimes I hate and sometimes I love this metaphor. It's like my house is never caught on fire, but that doesn't mean I don't have insurance on my
That's
house.
insurance. Right.
In the bank, the mortgage company wouldn't allow you to because the risk is just too big, right? And I think that's how you really have to think about it, especially in a smaller business. On one hand, the smaller businesses, the data would say they are less compliant. They said yes less frequently than the broader population. They're the ones most vulnerable. You know, a lawsuit or a big fine, it's an existential threat, the same as your house. If it burns down, you don't have insurance. Existential threat. Like, what the
Right.
heck are you going to do, right? If you're a business with, let's say you got 15 employees and you're doing $2 million a year, and you're working on 5% margins, right? So you got $100,000 in profit coming in, and you get sued for $700,000, you're out of business,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I kind
Significant.
of hate the scare tactic angle, but the reality is you can't ignore part of compliance is risk mitigation, right?
Right. 100%. And it doesn't have to be costly. I think it can be done fairly quickly and it doesn't have to be costly.
I'll read them and we'll go one by one. So, have you surveyed your workforce to assess employee engagement? Do you provide career path coaching for employees? Do you have an employee recognition program? Do you conduct company wide meetings to communicate changes and other company initiatives? And number five, do you conduct stay interviews to uncover employees' perspectives? If I take all those, zero growth firms said yes 48% of the time to those five questions. Fast growth firms said yes 81%. That's a 32 percentage point spread. Massive difference between these strategies, these best practices, employee retention between fast growth firms and zero growth firms. The spread gets even bigger when you look at smaller firms. Under 25 employees, it's a 35% of zero growth firms said yes. 73% of fast growth firms say yes. So it's less for the smaller firms. Smaller firms, we've talked about this many times, they struggle with time and resources and money. So it's understandable why they might be less, but the spread is massive. 38 percentage point difference between zero growth and fast growth firms. Mary, I'll ask the Captain Obvious question, knowing that you're going to add some not so obvious context to the answer here. Why is there such a big spread between zero growth firms and fast growth firms when it comes to retention?
So I'm not surprised by the results. I'm happy people are answering questions honestly, because this is the way I think the data would pan out. I think that the small growth firms, listen, they may be panicked and thinking, how do I grow? How do I grow? How do I grow? And be ignoring the fact that your employees are a key to growth. They might be focusing on marketing, for example, on cutting costs, changing vendors. but they may be, ignoring the thing that may be obvious to the fast growth firms. I'm not growing unless my employees stay. Retention is very expensive, 2.5 times the cost of your employees. Fast growth firms seem to understand that. And, retention has that engagement point. It doesn't matter if you have a full staff. If they're not engaged, they're not helping you grow the business.
Yeah. Before we jump into the individual questions, the second largest gap, so of all the 8 categories there, Ramla, the second biggest difference between zero growth and fast growth firms was development. I think no coincidence that those two things are related, right? So maybe if you're not developing your employees, maybe you don't want to retain them because maybe they're not very productive. So these things have to go hand in glove here, right? If I have good HR best practices from recruiting, so I'm targeting the right type of employees, I'm onboarding them correctly, I'm staying compliant, I'm setting good expectation, building relationship based on trust and respect, and I'm developing those employees. It seems self-evident that they would be the types of employees you would work harder to probably try to retain. Maybe these down year folks, maybe they don't miss the people when they leave because they weren't that productive in the first place. What do you think I'm overreading into that?
No, I don't. And I do think each of our categories that we've chosen to ask these questions are done, in a way that we understand they were, hand in hand, right? They're all a part of the puzzle to make help the business grow. And, that development piece, of course, engages employees, right? We show we're investing in our employees. It makes them, better employees because their knowledge base goes up. And then you retain the staff. When somebody feels successful in their job, they are much more likely to stay. How do we help them be successful? All of the things we're going to talk about today: career pathing, engaging them, stay interviews, all of that helps engage them
Yeah.
and retain them.
Yeah. So hand in glove, you got to develop your people to make them good enough that you'll want to keep them in the first place. That sounds rather inhumane to not, but as a marketer, I know that it's way more expensive to get a new customer than to keep a current one happy and stay with you. It's no different from employees, right?
Exactly.
So okay, with that, let's dive in and tackle question number 1. Have you surveyed your workforce to assess employee engagement? 44% of zero growth firms said yes. 83% said of the fast growth firms said yes. That's a 39% spread. It goes to 46% spread in the smaller firms under 25 employees. 27% of zero growth firms said yes, they do employee surveys to assess engagement. 73% of the fast growth. Focus there. I know that the small businesses, you're cash strapped, you're time strapped. You don't have the all the people and skills and tools around you, so you're just hanging on for dear life in some cases.
Yep.
Why such a massive difference on this topic of assessing employees' engagement?
I think it's all of those reasons, right? I think, maybe a slow growth, smaller organization might say this is time and money. Obviously, this is part of what we do on the HR compliance team when we have a client. A small business, even a larger business, wouldn't pay the thousands that we pay for a survey tool, nor would they understand exactly how to ask those questions, send that survey. But I will say that there are free survey tools out there. All I would caution people is that you got to be careful about what you ask and be able to react to the data that you get. You can't just send an employee engagement survey and everybody says, I hate this, this, and this, and you do nothing about it. It
Right.
does nothing for you. But if you send these employee engagement surveys, which we recommend to clients to do every year, more than once a year, those surveys show just by sending it, it's going to help your retention because your staff is going to say, Oh, they really care about what I do. Now, if you take that data, you share it with the employees and say, we're being transparent. Here's what came out of the survey, and here's what we're going to do about each of the points. Might not be able to do something up here, but we may do something there. That is, your retention's gonna and engagement is gonna go through the roof. They asked me, they listened to me, they acted on it.
If you were to ask, I think the average person of all the categories, and we'll just rattle them off: recruiting, benefits, onboarding, development, compliance, retention, performance, and post-employment, which would have the largest correlation to revenue growth based on implementing best practices, my gut says most people would say, well, performance, right? You're managing performance. You're improving performance. You're managing out low performance. That would have the highest correlation. But it's number three. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think this is where we always say this takes HR out of the cost center and into the ROI driver. I just think organizations don't focus enough on it, right? They're like, I hired this person, go do what you got to do, right? So managing performance and continuing to manage performance is really the differentiator here, right? This is where the organization has to say to themselves, what do I want out of this individual? What are our goals? How do I tie every single individual's performance to the ROI of the organization to drive our, success? So I'm surprised as well. I just think organizations aren't focusing enough on performance, and that's what the statistics are showing us.
Yeah, I almost have two conclusions here. On one, I'm not surprised that it's highly impactful, right? So
Yeah.
it's number
Yes.
3 out of the 8. So
Right.
it is very impactful. And if I aggregate all of again, there's 5 questions for each of the 8 sections. So 5 questions in performance. I'll rattle them off. Do you reward high performance with recognition and higher pay? Do you regularly communicate expectations for job performance? Do you have a formal job performance review process? Do you conduct 360 reviews with feedback from multiple team members? And do you document performance improvement plans for underperforming employees? 1,065 respondents, 61% of zero growth firms said yes to those 5 questions. So 5 questions of all those folks, 61% said yes. The fast growth firms, 83% said yes. If I look at the smaller firms under 25 employees, it's 51% of zero growth, 80% of fast growth. That's a 28% spread. So it is a really strong correlation.
For sure.
What's just really interesting, the number one was our topic last episode when we talked about this. Retention. Number 2 is development, and then performance is number 3. The conclusion I think I draw is talent wins, right? The more talented, skilled people, and I think about a sports team, and performance management is maybe coaching. It's like coaching matters a whole lot. Clearly, this is number 3, but a great coach can't overcome poor talent, right? And so you have to be recruiting the right talent, you have to be developing the right talent, and you have to be retaining that talent. If you can't develop and retain them, those are clearly more important than managing them. But I think, again, this is all hand in glove. These things are all related,
It
right?
is. It is. And I think, listen, you and I, for probably the past year to 2 years, have been talking about the war for talent. Well, the economy is changing and that's going to shift, right? For sure, I think that's going to be less of an issue. And I think organizations now need to focus on the right person. Mike, even the right person with all the talent in the world has to be developed. We have to think about retention, and we have to think about the performance and how
Yes.
we're going to drive and reward that performance. And listen, you know, rewarding performance is different for each individual, it's different for each job, industry, organization. So finding that special sauce takes a little bit of work. And sometimes organizations are so busy doing their day to day, they can't focus on this section. I can't impress upon everybody how important this is. And it's going to get more important as, the economy's changing. Again, I don't think the war for talent is going to be as difficult. I think you're going to find people, but finding the best people is always tough. And then keeping them on their A game is also difficult.
Yeah, something else I think jumps out when I read those questions for performance. Do you reward high performance with recognition and higher pay? Do you regularly communicate expectations for job performance? You could make a strong case why those two questions belong in the retention category, right?
Yep.
So if we've already acknowledged retention was the 5 retention questions had the highest correlation to revenue growth. Well, reasonable to think that if you're not compensating and recognizing your highest performers, if you're not setting expectations on job performance to kind of raise the floor, uh, that your best people aren't going to want to stay, right?
Right.
Winners don't want to work around losers. That may be a harsh way of saying it. There's a great Nick Saban quote on this, like people who strive for excellence don't want to work around mediocrity. They want to work around other people who push them, steel, sharpen steel, right?
Oh, absolutely.
All right, here we are, the grand finale. This is category number 8 of 8 for this series, where we are walking through the HR benchmark report. Topic number 1 was pre-employment through post-employment. So recruiting, benefits, onboarding, development, compliance, retention, performance. And this week we're covering post-employment. Here's maybe the biggest surprise of all. So post-employment HR best practices, no surprise, it's not the number 1, number 2, number 3 most impactful categories on as it correlates to revenue growth. But shockingly, and I'm looking at the data right here, it's number 5 out of 8. It's not last. It's not even at the bottom. It's middle of the pack. So eh, I think it's quite counterintuitive. How the heck could your post-employment best practices, by the way, we're going to get into them, and they're
Yeah.
rather compliance heavy. What the hell does that have to do with revenue growth? Really excited to actually tackle this topic that I think isn't self-evident for folks. Welcome to the show. By now, you all know Mary Simmons, our VP of HR Compliance. Unpack the topic. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you. And I'm excited to talk about this topic as well. Sad that we're at the end of the report because, I find it very interesting and I think helpful to our listeners. And I'm surprised also. I think that oftentimes employers might think, oh, they're at the end of employment, don't let the door hit you. And they're rushing people out the door.
Right.
But you of all people understand that every individual we come into contact with and we talk about it at hire, right? Even if we don't hire that person, we want them to have a good experience with our
Yep.
organization. We don't want them going on sites and saying bad things about the organization. But when they leave, maybe it's not a great, maybe they're going on to, a bigger position that we don't have. We still want that, person to be an ambassador of our company
That's
and,
right.
have goodwill. And I think that always helps. I mean, there's a lot of times where I worked for an organization, somebody left, we left on good terms and they refer business back to me. We'll go, I might have went to sort of a competitor, but you do this better, Mary. Can you help this client?
Yeah. No question. To me, I think there's a couple big takeaways here. I'm a big believer in employment brand. I've worked places where I had a first interview that I thought we just hit it off so beautifully, and I'm like, oh, this is a rock star. Can't wait to, you know me pretty well. I can get a little chummy, and I like having lots of conversations, and I really want to know someone pretty deeply before I hire them. And I can't wait to get to the second interview, and they ghost me. And I'm very positive because, oh, they started doing their homework. It's like, woo, like Mike, but I don't want to work for that company, right? And I've been at places like that in the past. And so employment brand really, really, really matters. I've also been at places where the reputation is stellar and candidates are stacked at the door, right? They want to join. They want to get credentialed by that type of a firm, either it's the brand cachet or it's the reputation in the market of making money or whatever it is. And so employment brand really, really, really matters. I think that's takeaway number one. Would you agree?
I love that. Yes,
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think there's number two so the math guy in me feels compelled to almost confess. We talk about this once in a while. Whenever you look at a study, and this is a big one, right? 1,065
Yeah.
respondents, big sample size. You read the Wall Street Journal, you might be looking at survey says, and there's 150 respondents, right?
Yeah.
So this is statistically significant, big sample size, big survey. So you can take it to the bank. But there's a difference between correlation and causation. So I don't think either one of us would contend that having a great post-employment HR practices is going to cause you to grow in revenue. But certainly the correlation is there, and there has to be a component that is employment brand related that just is intuitive.
Agreed.
But I think maybe less intuitive. I talked about it, I think, in episode number 1 of this series. Great companies do everything right,
Yeah.
and bad
Yeah.
companies do lots of things wrong. And I think
Correct.
there's something to be said that if you have good post-employment practices, you probably just central to your philosophy is treating people well, treating them with respect, in this desire to continuously get better. And hard to allocate how much of the impact comes from that, but I gotta believe maybe that's the biggest impact. It's not even the employment brand. What I'm curious your opinion on that.
I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, I think that the fast growing companies do want to learn from their mistakes. We do exit interviews all the time for our clients, but I do have some clients that'll say, "No, it's okay. I don't care. They're leaving. I don't care why they're leaving." And we try to point them to the reasons why you do want to know. Because number one, retention is very expensive. So you want to do an exit interview so you know why they're leaving. That exit interview might also tell you some compliance gaps. You might have a manager speaking inappropriately and they don't want to talk about it until after they resign because they're scared, nervous, etc. So I think the fast growth firms, as you said, they want to know and learn from their mistakes and just get better and better. And you can't do that if you're not informed. You
Yeah.
have to be informed. You have to have data and you have to have information to get better.
That's it for this episode of Mission to Grow. Thanks for joining us today. For show notes and more episodes, visit us at missiontogrow.com. If you found this content valuable, I invite you to share it with a friend and subscribe to the show. If you really want to help, I'd love it if you left a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen. Mission to Grow is sponsored by Assure. Assure helps more than 100,000 businesses get access to capital, stay compliant, and develop the talent they need to grow. To learn more about how Assure can help your business grow, visit assuresoftware.com. Until next time.